Welcome to the Money to Meaning podcast, where we explore ways to bridge the gap between money and our heart's desires. I'm your hostess, Amy Adler. My guest today is Kayvon Rashidi. He's a family law attorney and mediator in the Austin area, not too far from me. Welcome, Kayvon.
Thank you, Amy. Good morning. Happy to be here.
Really happy to have you and thankful for you to take the time to do this with me. I think it'll be fun.
Yeah, anytime.
So tell us a little bit about your background and the work you do at your firm.
So I'm a family lawyer here in Austin, Texas. I practice all across Texas, and I've practiced family law exclusively my entire career. So we do divorce cases, we do custody cases, we do prenups and postnups, adoptions, protective orders, anything under the kind of family law purview. I'm board certified in family law. And one of the things that we deal with a lot in family law is we work with other professionals, right? Because our clients have all kinds of different needs. So it's oftentimes we're kind of a team with therapists or financial experts, other lawyers too.
So what kind of work do you do with financial experts and financial professionals?
Yeah, it's a good question. So it really depends on the client. One thing I really like to do is if I have a client who's not super savvy financially, what I do at the onset of the case is set them up with someone who's financially literate and can help them get a sense of their needs, at the end of the divorce, so that when we're reaching a deal or going to trial trying to decide who's getting what and how assets or money is allocated, they have a good understanding of what it is they're needing and if those needs are being met.
Is that usually like a CDFA or financial planner kind of person that
Yes.
you do that?
Yeah. And that's actually, I think, one of the first ways you and I started working together, if I'm not wrong.
Yeah, it is. That's definitely one of the services that I provide to clients for sure. And one of my favorites too is kind of helping to give that confidence to the spouse that feels in the dark about all the finances in their relationship.
Right.
So what do you like most about your job?
What I like the most is that most of the time, a lot of the time, I get to help people in really tough situations. And most people who go through a divorce or a custody case, it's the hardest or one of the hardest things they're ever going to have to deal with. And so it's very, very rewarding to be with someone from start to finish in that process and kind of move them along and have them end up in a better and stronger place than they were at the beginning.
What don't you like?
Well, kind of the other side of that coin is we have situations where it's an extremely tough situation and there's not really a great outcome. We can help as much as we can, but the end result's not going to be great. And so that can be tough to deal with.
The tough reality check that we have to give them.
Tough reality check. And we deal with people who are experiencing really kind of traumatic and hard events sometimes. Things like abuse or people where the financial accounts have been totally depleted. I don't want to say there's not a lot you can do to help them, but the outcomes are limited sometimes.
Yeah, if there's no money, then how do you get money when there's no money?
Right, exactly.
Yeah, that's totally understandable. Although I'll say that whenever we do work together, I really like being able to help give some of the news and talk people through that, at least the financial side of it, helping them come to terms with reality and understanding.
Yeah, and I think that one of the things I've noticed about you is that you do a good job of linking with them and kind of relating to them, kind of talking about your own personal experience in divorce and I was in your situation, that kind of thing. That's really helpful.
Yeah, for some reason, as soon as I tell them that I've been divorced twice, they always just like their anxiety level drops dramatically. They feel like, oh, so you actually get it. You actually understand. And here you are, like working with people going through divorce. How can you stand to do that after the trauma yourself? Like, well, it's fun for me in many ways to be able to help other people avoid the crap that I went through. It's like
Right.
it meant something. It had meaning then. It wasn't in vain.
Right. Yeah.
So, and you kind of alluded to this already. We've worked together on several clients, and I've really enjoyed that. There aren't a lot of attorneys who I really like to work with, and I'm frankly very picky about which ones I do work with because I operate from a very high standard of integrity, and I really want to be helpful to clients and not just spend their money
Mhm.
unnecessarily. And so I really appreciate your approach as you do the same. And of course, you're realistic, you're reasonable, you have a really fun, dark sense of humor, which is fun for us to joke about behind the scenes. You also understand the financial issues when as I've described them. And of course, I try to put things in layman's terms as best as I can, but there's only so much of that we can do. And it's still complex, especially in the state of Texas, dealing with community property issues. And then, of course, you're really open-minded about some of my very unconventional ideas and approaches to things, which I also really appreciate. So I think you're a really good resource to ask this particular question. What are some of the problems that you see with the family law system and the way it works that cause clients to be afraid for their financial future?
I'll answer that. Let me just say first, you mentioned that you don't like working with a ton of lawyers. I totally agree. I'm the same way. Um, in terms of the family court system, you know, at its root, I'll speak for Texas, where I practice, and I think it's the case in all kinds of jurisdictions. It's just not a good way to achieve a fair and equitable outcome when we're talking about the end of a family relationship. Okay. It's not a way where you can right the wrongs of what's all happened in the marriage. It's not perfect at all. It's extremely imperfect. And we have a number of judges who are overworked, you know, they're very busy. And so, you know, there's counties I go to where you get 1 hour for a final trial. And so that's a half hour per side where you've got to tell your entire story. When we're talking about dividing assets, let alone the kid stuff, put that aside. It's just, you know, it's not a good way to resolve these divorces and disputes. Um, the other aspect, you know, I will say is oftentimes professionals, you know, attorneys and other professionals who are brought on to work on cases, financial experts and otherwise, there are some bad incentives for these folks. So we deal with attorneys and other professionals who use a family's misery in a divorce case to enrich themselves. Um, so again, it's not a great way to resolve disputes.
Yeah, and I think that in generally speaking, when people hire attorneys to help them go through a divorce, the attorneys requirements like to avoid being sued for malpractice of the things that you have to say to your clients sometimes poke the bear in ways that might be unnecessary. It's just it seems like the way that the system is set up is encouraging fighting, more fighting.
It absolutely does, you know, and when you've got people who are obviously very emotional and they're scared, they're going through a traumatic experience, they rely on us professionals to kind of guide them. And if you've got one who's not, who's throwing kind of fuel on the fire, that creates a bad situation for the folks.
And you've been in front of a lot of different judges in your career so far. Would you say that they're always consistent with the way that they rule and how they make their decisions?
I'll be diplomatic here. Um, I think you get a wide variety of perspectives among the different judges throughout our state, in any state, really.
Mm-hmm.
And so there are some judges who have a background in family law, which is great because they understand the legal issues. There are some who, if they might not have a background in family law, but they're super invested in going through everything you submit and kind of doing a lot of research to make sure they come up with the right decision. That's also great. Um, we have some who are just super unpredictable, and um, you know, maybe they apply the laws in ways that I wouldn't necessarily agree with. We have judges in Texas, a lot of judges who have, you know, in addition to their family law, they hear all variety of cases, right? Criminal law, civil matters, and a lot of them, a lot of lawyers don't really, they're not excited about family law, so they minimize it. They don't pay a ton of attention to it. I'll handle this in a half hour and then focus on this murder trial I have to deal with.
Yeah, it is. It's such a kind of a crapshoot sometimes, it seems like. And also, judges are elected officials. So I imagine they change, different people become judges fairly often as well. And then you get a whole new set of approaches and ideas. So you don't really know when you start a divorce who your judge is going to be necessarily in your final trial, or if they're going to generally tend to rule in your favor. And even if they do generally tend to, if they would in your case anyway, right?
That's absolutely right. And look, you don't get a chance to tell the judge everything in your case. You have a very limited amount of time, and the judge has limited information on which to make a decision.
It's not realistic to expect a judge to even understand and digest a lifetime or a length of a marriage of issues that have come up and in a couple of hours and be able to make a decision about what's fair and reasonable. I hate that word fair. It's so subjective. But
You're totally right, and you know, to their credit, also these judges, it's not that they don't care a lot of the time. It's that in addition to one case, they've got 10 other cases they got to deal with that day. They just got to move quickly.
yeah, well, and quite frankly, if I were a judge, I would get burned out of having to deal with all of this fighting and contention. Because if the divorce cases that go to court, I assume, are the ones that are the most contentious. And so a judge sitting through this fighting day after day, I imagine it would grate on their nerves after a while anyway. So I give them a lot of credit too for taking on those roles.
Yeah, it's no one's really ever going to court for a divorce case and is happy, right? So you're just dealing with a bunch of unhappy people for the most part, and I think you're exactly right. These judges get graded and jaded as well.
I got yelled at in my divorce trial from the judge. So that was
Uh,
a fun, a not so fun experience, but now I can laugh about it at least.
well, I've been yelled at plenty of times, so don't take it personally.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
The attorney who was asking me questions was opposing counsel, and he was intentionally asking questions to piss me off that led to the judge yelling at me. So yeah, it all was part of the plan. It's a lot of it is just Hollywood acting, it seems like, in many
It
ways.
is, and but I'll tell you what's more fun is that when you see the judge yelling at the other lawyer, and even more fun than that when you've got lawyers yelling at the judge, because that's just you kind of sit back and you know watch the show. It's great
Watch them
entertainment.
hang themselves.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, that's good. At least there's some entertainment value in the experience. I am not a fan of court, so I certainly love that you try to encourage your clients to settle outside of court, and I always do the same. So I'm glad that we're on the same side. So when you're dealing with a client who has been a stay-at-home parent for many years and hasn't worked in a workforce that pays money for that period of time, and they're just furious and terrified about how they're going to make it financially after the divorce is final, what do you do? How do you help them?
Well, I think the first step, and this is another compliment to you. It's the same kind of skill I think you have. You work with a lot of folks going through divorce, and you understand that before you get to the technical part of what you're working on them with, in the same way as me, um, you've got to understand and really plan for their emotional state. They're undergoing they're experiencing a lot of fear, anxiety about a situation. There's a lot of unknown. And so, you know, acknowledge that, give them as much information as you can. And again, I like to link them up with professionals like you, or I have a lot of clients who can benefit from therapy while the case is going on. So I set them up with a therapist.
That's
Um,
amazing.
you know, and so if you can kind of give them whatever resource they need so that you can get them to a place where you can kind of intelligently talk about the actual issues in the legal case. That's kind of my approach.
Do you like to bring those financial people to mediation, for example, to help those clients feel like they're supported when they're ready to say yes to a deal?
Yeah, absolutely. It can be very helpful. Sometimes they need that reassurance. And if the professional isn't coming to mediation, leading up to mediation, I love to spend a lot of time kind of one-on-one, all of us preparing so that everyone's on the same page, especially when it comes to how are we going to divide up assets. And you're talking to someone who's financially illiterate, their spouse has been managing the finances for 10, 20 years. So just having as much help as possible on that is great.
Yeah, and really what you just described is a lot of the way that I work with clients too on the front end is do as much planning work as possible so that they know exactly what they need in mediation and what they need to leave mediation with or walk away. And so that does seem to give them a lot more confidence and people are able to actually settle in mediation more often when they can have those conversations in reality, like in specificity with the actual dollars in mind and not just at a high level what if scenario. So that's great that you do that. And I think it's also valuable for the financial person to be available during mediation, to be able to say, like, this is the latest offer I got, what do you think? Is this something that I can live with? What are the tax issues that might be around that kind of stuff? I really love being available. I don't go to mediations typically. I always tell people I'm happy to put it on my calendar that this is your mediation date, but rather than charge you for every hour of your mediation to have me sit there with you, I'll just be available by phone or text, and you can email me whatever offers you're considering while you're in the mediation process. Because my understanding of the traditional mediation process, we'll talk about this a little more in a minute, but my understanding is that usually in the litigation process in divorce, a mediator will go between two different rooms, one room with one spouse and their attorney and team, and the other room with the other spouse and their attorney and team.
Right.
So there's a lot of times just sitting around then when the mediator's in the other room.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and let me just add to what you said. I can think of a couple of specific instances in cases where you and I have worked together where you have met with the client throughout the case and they have an idea of what to expect, right? This exact type of client we're talking about where they haven't managed assets, they've been taking care of the kids. And so when you get to mediation, there's not this whole kind of all this anxiety about, oh my gosh, I've got to make a final decision today and I don't know what I need. They've already met with you or someone who does what you do, and they're able to kind of think about it in a calm way as a business transaction.
That's awesome. It's good to hear. I oftentimes I don't hear about the other side of the event. If they're satisfied, then I don't oftentimes hear that they got it worked out. So that's good to hear that work that we do is helpful.
Yeah.
So you've actually become a mediator recently, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what does a typical mediation look like, and how do you prefer to do mediations?
So we do them in Zoom and in person now. And like you said, in Texas, for the most part, we have what's like called the closed caucus style, which means the mediator goes from one room to the other, where each room has a party, a litigant, and their attorney. Um, there are other states where it's kind of all one open caucus, everyone's in the same room. I don't think that for family law, that's a very useful way of doing it. I think that doesn't make sense. So I've been to other mediations where you do it that way, but it doesn't make sense for family law.
Why not?
Well, it's in family law, the parties want to kind of relate to the mediator. They want to tell them their story, and you can't exactly do that when your spouse is sitting there, right? My spouse did A, B, and C. He can't take care of the kids because he's a drunk, or he does this. You can't really say that in front of the other person. It can lead to an all-out brawl, which is not conducive to settlement.
That's an interesting perspective because I've actually been doing, I mean, I call it mediation on steroids, but it's not even really mediation because I can't use my mediator's license in this sense, because what I do with people is we're all together in the same Zoom room talking about how to divide the assets and handle the ongoing income and expenses if there isn't any kind of sharing it's appropriate, and everybody hears what I'm saying and everybody hears what they're saying, and it fosters a very open environment that really creates a sense of trust that there's nothing being hidden. Because what I found in that mediation format that you just described is that what I think pokes the bear is that waiting period when we're sitting in the room with our attorney while the mediator is in the other room,
Mhm.
and we have no idea what's happening in there, what's being said, and then suddenly the mediator comes back with a new offer, a counter offer. So,
Yeah.
but I understand what you're saying. I think there's probably circumstances where this would work, in where either one would be appropriate. So there are definitely plenty of circumstances that my approach would not work, especially if it is a client who needs to be able to vent about their spouse.
Well, let me clarify. The type of mediation I'm talking about is when the other kind absolutely can't work. If we can do it in a way that's more collaborative, where everyone's in the same room and being open, that's ideal, right? But if they're coming to a mediation for me, it's probably past that point.
I see. I see. So in your work, usually are the mediations that are prior to the official mediation more informal, like from your desk, emailing offers or yeah. Okay. Okay.
Yeah. And we oftentimes what we do is kind of an informal sit down with the two lawyers and the parties, whether on the phone or in one room, and kind of see if we can talk through it. And that's been successful oftentimes. When emotions are high or when they're fighting over the kids, that can get hard.
For sure. Yeah. So what made you decide to add mediator license credentials to your letters after your name?
Well, we talked earlier about the court system being very imperfect and flawed in resolving disputes, especially disputes among families. It's not good for people, and I've seen that over and over again in my career. If you can resolve a case, especially if you've got children that you've got a co-parent for years after the divorce, if you can resolve a case without going to trial, that's better for both parties and the children. And I always tell people, there are three big things I like about mediation that, as opposed to trial. You save money. You save a lot of money from going to trial. You save time, right? Time and emotional baggage that comes with trial. And three, you have, and this is the most important in my opinion, you get to control the outcome of your case. You have control at mediation. If you go to court, the courts, the judges are confined with what the law says they can or can't do, right? They've got a very narrow set of options. If you're in mediation, you can come up with any type of agreement that works for your family.
You have just pinpointed there one of the biggest platforms that I stand on, which is personal sovereignty and being able to control, make your own decisions for your own life and future and family, which to me, that is like the most valuable thing we can get out of this process. Like having a judge make a decision for you is so disempowering. So yeah,
Yeah,
I love that that's a big point for you. Super important. And I think people appreciate that too. When you share that with them, it helps them feel more trusting of what you offer mediation wise, but also maybe even representation wise. If you're helping them make decisions for themselves as opposed to making the decision for them, which a lot of attorneys try to do. This is a good
right.
deal. You should take this. You need to take this deal. I hear that all the time.
So have you, in your experience with clients, have you shared with them, I had to go to trial and here are the downsides. I didn't have control over my case and here's why this is better. Have you done that with them?
All the flipping time, I have to
Yeah.
say the same thing. Yeah. About this trial that I went to, it was probably the worst day of my life. And that is not an exaggeration. it was
Yeah.
miserable, and it was a short trial. The marriage was only 2 years. So the fact that we went to trial felt so stupid in the first place.
Right.
And then to have to sit there, I mean, I felt disempowered, I felt humiliated, I felt angry about having to see my ex again and go through this. And then when the judge made the decision, I although I was happy because the judge happened to rule in my favor. The only reason my divorce went to trial was because my ex wanted my money, wanted some of my money. And even though we were only married for 2 years, and the judge ended up awarding me some of his money in the end, right? When I just wanted
Yeah.
for each of us to take our toys and go home. And the reason why the judge awarded me money was because of how much I had to spend on my attorney fees. So I lost pretty much all of the savings that I had made in those couple of years fighting him,
Right.
which that hurt. It really
Right.
hurt. But yeah, I'm happy about the outcome ish, but I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy because it was so miserable. And it killed my health. My physical health declined immediately right after my trial was over. And that part of it is, I mean, there's no dollar amount that you can put on your sanity and your health. So
Sure.
going to trial, if it's going to stress you out so much that you're going to lose your health, it's not worth it.
It's traumatic, right? It's a trauma response.
So, yeah, it was very traumatic. I've been through a lot of trauma in my life, and that was not low on the list. It's
Yeah.
pretty high up there. So, yeah, I would not. I always try to encourage my clients to do whatever they can to avoid going to trial. Sometimes it's just inevitable,
Sure.
but yeah, I agree. So do clients ever tell you that if they knew things worked the way that they actually do before they got married, that or before they invested, before they bought their homes, before they started their retirement plans, or before they commingled their inheritance money or whatever, that they would
Right.
have done things differently?
Absolutely. All the time. And one thing we see a lot of is folks who get married in a different state. Maybe they're from California or somewhere, and we've seen recently a lot of Californians come move to Texas, right?
Texas.
And they come here and they think they're getting a divorce and they think it's going to be a certain way, right? This is what I'm used to, and it's absolutely not, right? And so one thing I would encourage anyone to do is if they're thinking about divorce, or even if they're not, do some research and find out what the divorce laws are in the state that you live in. Okay, that's the first thing. The other thing that's extremely important, and you and I have had cases where this has come up, but Texas is a community property state, and it's your burden to prove if something's your separate property. And so if we've got clients who owned a ton of assets before the marriage, if they can't provide records to show and trace that that's their separate property, there is a presumption that all the property is community property, right? And so getting records from financial institutions is extremely difficult and often impossible. And so, the other advice I would have is save as many records as you can from right before the time of marriage. You'll never know if you're going to need it.
I think Texas has one of the most complex set of laws around marital, community, and separate property of any other state. There are a couple of other states that are community property that have similar crazy additional rules that make things more complicated.
Sure.
But Texas is by far the most challenging. So I feel like people who move to Texas from other states keep getting unpleasantly surprised when they end up divorced. And it's not something that they can ever really anticipate earlier in their lives. Like this is a big challenge. People, when they get married, don't have any idea that they're going to end up in another state somewhere down the road and then end up getting divorced in that state.
Sure.
Every state has their own laws. So the
Mhm.
one thing that keeps coming to mind that's the best solution for people to not even have to worry about that is a prenup.
Yeah. Yeah.
You
And
you do those, right?
I do, and let me just say to your point about the complex community property schemes and laws in Texas, um, you know, there are a bunch of lawyers I know who practice family law and they don't know these laws. Okay,
Oh yeah.
you know some of them. Okay, so I don't expect clients to come in here and know it. All right, it's difficult. Um, to the point about prenups, yes, we do prenups all the time. I always advise people to do one if possible, even if they don't have anything at the time of marriage. You know, a prenup, if you can agree on almost anything when it comes to the money part of your divorce in a prenup in Texas. And so what I tell people is you can at least set a baseline set of expectations, right? So that when you're going to divorce it, down the lot down the line, if you have to, you at least know kind of there's a narrow range of outcomes because of your prenup. And that saves a lot of uncertainty and nervousness for folks.
How many prenups do you do typically in a year right now?
Um, maybe 20, 30, 40, something like that. I really enjoy doing them.
And do you have like a typical profile of a client that gets a prenup usually, or does it vary?
We usually deal with folks who they have a lot of separate property. They've got a lot of family money or assets, or they're just coming into a marriage having earned a high income, or they own a business and they want to protect those assets going into a marriage. Um, and you can come up with all kinds of creative stuff. Like I've seen some weird ones where it's like, the wife is compensated for each child that she bears. Kind of weird in my opinion. There's also ones where it's like every X amount of years that we're married, you get a little more money for each year going forward. Kind of a step up scale.
What's interesting about the whole concept is that when people get married, they don't know what's going to happen in their marriage, if they're going to have a whole gaggle of kids, if they're not going to be able to have kids. They may have a plan of what they want, but it doesn't always work out that way at the time that they get married. And one of the biggest things that I see happening is that people sign prenups and even just get married thinking that they're going to keep working in their careers, but then when they have children, decide that it actually costs them more to have kids in daycare than it does for them to work. And they decide to stay, one parent decides to stay home and not bring in an income, which then can completely change the results of a divorce based on the prenup. If
Right.
it's written with decision about how the income during the marriage is going to be treated. So one of the things that I want to do with this new life transitions finance professional program is help to train the finance professionals to be able to work alongside attorneys as they write prenups, to be able to help clients think through how the finances are going to work in the marriage in contractual form. That's what a prenup is to me. It's just a
Sure.
marriage contract. I don't look at it as a death sentence to the marriage like a lot of people do. So I think,
Right.
I want that to be more common. And I think it's really important to have these finance professionals educated too, so that they can be good partners with you in building prenups that are really solid, that really help to protect clients from the changing family law system or whatever state they're in, and or if the laws change while they're married and
Right.
impact them, all kinds of things change. This way, if they sign a prenup, then just like what you were describing with a mediation agreement, they are keeping control over what happens in their lives as opposed to letting the law dictate how it goes. So is there any advice that you would give to somebody who's considering getting married but doesn't want to end up broke because the marriage didn't make it for the long haul, that you might suggest putting in a prenup, or to help them come to terms with the idea of having a prenup?
Yeah, like you said, I don't think it's a death sentence at all. And I find that people that I meet with and work on prenups with, I've seen very, very few of them come back for a divorce case. And I think one reason is that it kind of helps both parties have a sense of here's how it's going to be if we divorce. There's not this big looming uncertainty, which I think is a great weight off of people. If it's done in a way that's equitable, the client who's maybe staying at home with the children has at least a baseline understanding of I'll be okay. Okay. And I think that's one, going back to the service that you were talking about providing, that would be hugely beneficial to clients, because I can't tell you how many folks I get who come in here with an ironclad prenup and they tell me, well, what does this say? And they're getting screwed. But there's nothing anyone can do about it because the agreement's valid and it's enforceable. Right. And they didn't have the financial literacy of when they signed the agreement, really knowing what they were signing up for.
Or having any idea of what that would look like down the road, even if they did have some financial literacy, not understanding or not being able to predict what the future could hold if they signed it in that way. So yeah, I agree. I think it would be really helpful to have this financial expertise participating in the prenup development process and giving people more advice about how to write it in a way that's protective and informative at the same time.
Totally.
So one more question, going back to the clients that are fearing for their financial future. When you have a client who can't pay your bill because they've been cut off from access to their funds by their soon-to-be ex, what do you do? How do you help them?
Well, there are a couple ways. In Texas, if you're authorized to use community monies for things like attorney's fees. So even if I've got a client who doesn't have access to money, but their spouse does, I can go to court and ask the judge to order that we get access to some accounts. Okay.
How long does it take to get on the docket, to get to court and to make that happen?
Well, it depends on the county. It can be a pretty long time. It can be a month or two. Okay. I try to do it as quickly as I can, obviously, so that my client's not locked out, but we're at the mercy of these courts. The other thing we do often, Amy, is, if there's not liquid funds available at the time of divorce, but maybe they're going to sell an asset at the end of the divorce, we'll make an agreement that we get paid afterwards. Because I'm sure you've experienced this, but we see so many people here in Austin where they have one asset, right? It's their house. And inevitably, it's probably going to be sold. And so that kind of ends up paying for things like attorneys and other bills.
Yeah. And the challenge with that is that they can't pay their regular monthly bills if they've been cut off from access, and the only asset they have that will eventually be able to pay you at least is their house. But what do they do for all of the other things to be able to live on, pay the mortgage, pay for food to eat?
Yeah. Yeah. There's not a great answer, right? Try to resolve the case as quickly as you can.
Yeah. Yeah. It seems to be a growing problem that I've seen. Have you seen it happening more often, more recently?
I don't know if it's been more often for me. I've seen a lot of it throughout my career, right? And this is kind of, we talked earlier about you're dealing with folks in bad situations, right? And I can think of one case in particular where one of the parties in the case totally depleted all of their assets, okay? Every retirement, every bank account, brokerage account. And my client comes to find out that the parties actually are in a ton of debt to the IRS, to state tax authorities, all kinds of creditors. And in that kind of situation, you're doing your best, but the outcome at the end is not going to be a great one. So yeah.
I was afraid that was going to be your answer. Yeah. It's a common problem, and there really isn't a good answer. So what I keep thinking is we have to be able to help people get set up at the time of marriage and throughout their marriages with some safety from that happening. I'm not sure what that answer is at this moment, but it is something that's on the forefront of my mind that feels important to address like yesterday, because there are so many people who don't have access to their funds, and it ends up like killing their credit score if they don't pay their bills on time or at all. It hurts so many aspects of their lives that it really is, it takes a very long time to recover from, even if they do get access within a couple of months to their money.
Absolutely, it does. Yeah, it's a huge problem.
I want to jump back to the prenups because I just thought of one more question that I want to ask
Yeah.
you about that. So we talked about how prenups are useful in the divorce scenario, but actually I keep thinking that prenups could be really helpful too in a probate scenario as well, right? I mean, wouldn't you think so? Have you ever seen
Yes.
situations where that's come in handy?
It's come in handy a lot in probate situations. So one common thing you see, right, in these probate cases is you have someone who dies. And maybe that person first has one family and has a set of children, divorces that spouse, and then goes on later to marry someone else, right? So when they die, you've got these children who are the heirs, and you've also got the wife who are the heirs. They're not related, right? They oftentimes have tension beforehand even, and now they have a reason to fight. And so those cases can be in an absolute cluster. But if you have a prenup that's valid and enforceable, you can bring it in front of a judge, probate judge. That really cuts through the entire fight.
Mm-hmm.
It can.
So yet another reason why prenup's not a death sentence to the marriage.
That's right. I don't know if you remember Anna Nicole Smith.
Oh, I
In that
remember.
case, I think there was a lot of fights between her late husband's children and her over the estate. I think she ended up prevailing there, but a really detailed prenup would be helpful in that kind of situation.
I wonder if there was one. That's an interesting case to bring
Yeah,
up.
yeah.
Huh.
I don't know. I think the guy was really in love, so I don't know if he was thinking he needed to sign one.
That's the problem, right? We think we're just so in love and nothing bad's ever going to happen. But I always say that your marriage is going to end one way or another in death or divorce. So, in one of those cases, in either of those cases, you need to know where your shit is and what's yours, right? So that you can work this out. So,
That's that's grim. I guess that's an appropriate Halloween tagline.
yeah, it is. I know it's a little bit morbid, but it's also a good way to add some humor to a challenging subject. Is yeah, I mean, we all pass away one day, right? So it's best to know what happens to your stuff, whether it's you that's gone, your spouse that's gone, or the divorce happens. So in any of those scenarios, a prenup could come in handy, very handy.
Absolutely.
Well, I can't tell you how grateful I am to you, Kayvon, for your candor and being willing to take some time to chat with me today and share with our audience all of this information about divorce and probate. How can someone find you if they're looking for an attorney or a mediator in the Austin area?
So our website right now, the firm's name is Powers Kayvon Rashidi. So pkrfamilylaw.com. That's my website. My email is krashidi@pkrfamilylaw.com. Um, I enjoyed being here very much. I enjoyed the conversation as always. I always learn a lot talking to you and continue to enjoy working with you on cases.
Thank you for all of that. Thank you again for being here. It was a pleasure for me as well. I look forward to our next case together.